Michael, hey, congratulations on your new film, Turn Me On.
Thank you very much.
You know what? It is a lovely film. I love the interaction and the themes throughout this entire film. But tell us first, what initially drew you that you wanted to direct Turn Me On?
Yeah, I had just come off of making a film that I co-wrote and directed that took many years, and I think there was some sort of almost urgency in me to just want to direct right away again. And I have a bit of a slow writing process, so as I was developing something longer, I saw the script that this wonderful screenwriter Angela Barassa, came across my desk. She wrote, and I saw it as an opportunity to, build something from the ground up because it kind of, I had read it during the pandemic in 2020, and I think I was partially looking for some sort of escapism. And I suppose the masochistic side of me was escapism meant building a dystopia, in this sort of sci-fi world that the film takes place in. And that seemed interesting to me. And I think at the core of the story, outside of those sort of genre elements, there was a story about the human condition and characters kind of experience human emotions for the first time. So that felt like an interesting place that I wanted to press in.
That is very ironic that you picked up a script like this during the pandemic because all the themes from this movie kind of went hand in hand of what a lot of people were going through, sort of like an emotionalist society and isolation in its own way.
Yeah, that's interesting. And ironically, Angela had written the script well before the pandemic, many years earlier, as it turns out. And so it was just a coincidence. But I think I I couldn't help but maybe project some of what we were going through globally as a society onto, some of the look of this film, some of the direction, I suppose, within it. It did have characters, within the first few pages that weren't were forbidden from physically touching one another. And I think that idea felt very familiar, and that's part of maybe the reason there was some attraction there. But it was, yeah, again, an opportunity to kind of create, like good allegory does, a bit of a mirror onto what we're actually going through, and it becomes we take obviously the themes of the film go a certain direction and what the story's about, but it's an opportunity to kind of provide us a cautionary tale of this is what can happen if we take these ideas too far, right?
So tell us how you wanted to set the mood to begin this film, to create that dystopian society, this emotionless, story part of how people are going to live in a controlled environment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes back to me visually. There was there was a desire to have something that kind of reflected that, right? To reflect control. So we keep the camera, for instance, very very static for certainly a lot of the early half of the film. That I think does two things. It reflects the kind of rigid society that these characters live in, but the camera is also a bit surveillance-like, so it becomes observational as we understand that they're being watched and monitored. I wanted, the actual audience's point of view to be from that angle as well, and I think beneath all that, it creates a sense of unease and it creates natural tension just by being so rigid in the look of the film, but by choosing not to move the camera, which, by the way, is much more complicated to do on a small budget with limited time, but especially shooting a single camera, as it were, too. But we wanted to kind of keep to that rule. Our cinematographer Matt Mitchell and I were, very specific about that. But then, as the story progresses and our characters evolve rather and start to open up emotionally, we try to reflect that in our camera movement as well by literally starting to move the camera, right? And creating a place where we could be a little bit looser. And we do that with color as well. So there's something about starting in this kind of like colder look, and then gradually things warm up as the characters start to experience new things for the first time. And I'm also always inspired by where I'm actually shooting, and the cold stuff lent into the fact that we were, quite literally in shooting at a cold time of year, but we were surrounded in this part of Western New York where we were by this large body of water, Lake Ontario, which just had this very alluring blue that I still dream about to this day. Actually, it's just the quality of light and the way that the blues looked in this body of water were pretty inspiring. But it lent to this sort of cold emotional place that the characters were in. So that's why we literally open up the movie on Lake Ontario for that reason, or it's anonymous in our movie. But these things all lend to those aesthetic choices, I suppose.
Now, with any type of dystopian storyline, they either set it up in the future or an alternate, timeline of reality. Was there much of a debate on that when you were trying to craft, the setting for Turn Me On?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was never interested in putting a specific time or place on it. Both things are a bit anonymous in our story, and it's. I mean, there's a few reasons why you do that, but I like in terms of time, we were, when you build a fictional place, you're making a lot of micro decisions, what things look like, what things sound like, what technology to use, and we were surrounded by the bones of some of our locations were kind of stuck in the 60s, 70s, and those eras, and so it felt appropriate to maybe play with that a little bit and maybe add some slightly future tech into that world, but tech that also feels a little bit analog and not certainly what we're using in 2025, not so contemporary. And it becomes this sort of like, retro tech, this retro future in a way. And I think that's where my taste lies. And it felt like it felt like it gave us permission to make things a little bit more unique in that way. And it goes with the same thing with the type of media that the characters are digesting every day in a way. And we take that to extremes in some level. We decided that there's a lot of very vintage media that one of the characters is given access to towards the end of the film. And a lot of that stuff is from the 1930s and 1940s that felt like it was appropriate for this world that had been, just part of their media library. And same with place. It's set in a very anonymous kind of wooded wilderness place. That the key thing was just that it was secluded from the rest of the world. And I think hopefully we're successful in doing both of those things, of kind of keeping that mystery to it.
It certainly does present that mystery because you done it well, and the only hint that I was actually trying to figure out with the time was when they watch there's certain videos with the animation sequences for that. Could you tell us about the animation and what influenced with the character for the animation that they watch?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was in the script. It was not specific, but it was that they were definitely watching something that was just kind of droning on and redundant. And when it came time to actually, put content on those screens, I had been a fan for years of this artist from Italy named Luca Zanato. He actually lives in Scandinavia, but he has Italian heritage, and he makes he makes these kind of infinite loops of the characters similar to the ones that are in the film that usually alternate between a happy and sad face. And I thought, being a fan of his work, I thought there was not there couldn't be a better visual metaphor for that, for what our characters are going through and the way this world works. So I reached out to him, and this is like, one of the many reasons I like making films is a collaboration and getting to, collaborate with fellow artists. You're a fan of their work, and he had happened to be a fan of my first film, so there became a nice dialogue there, and so he created these pieces that I do feel like are kind of timeless, the way you're describing them, and partly remind me of kind of vintage PBS or like vintage Sesame Street, but they're entirely unique in their own right, but also just worked perfectly in terms of a child having a childlike quality for characters who are really in a childlike state at that point where they're just kind of digesting things that they're watching.
Most excellent. And tell us about the casting that you ended up with Belle and Nick. What was that process and the requirements to have them both play these, I want to say, these characters that go through so much change in your film?
Yeah, well, I had been a fan of both Dell and Nick for a long time, so I was grateful to that they were available to and wanted to sign on to do this. Unfortunately, sometimes with the way independent financing and making films goes, is there's a lot of starts and stops, and they had both been signed on to make the movie quite a while before we were actually filming. So that gave us all an opportunity to really connect and talk about these characters and figure out a little bit what that was going to look like. And it's one of my favorite parts of the job of being a director is just getting to witness great talent in their process. And both Nick and Belle have completely different styles, but they're both very, very dedicated to their craft and, had a lot of original ideas that they brought to it and what that awakening looks like, these two modes. And I knew from the beginning, and this goes for all of the cast, the center ensemble of the film, who are all kind of experiencing those two different sides of it. I didn't want that to look like one specific thing. I didn't want it to feel robotic or zombie-like, but just more suppressed. They're on essentially an antidepressant of sorts, an extreme version. That's where the science fiction element comes in, I suppose. But I think a universal direction that I was giving a lot around that time is that no matter how it's being physically manifested, there's still a conscience behind your eyes. They all have souls inside. So how that manifests might look a little different for each of the characters. But I think that's where I was interested in pressing on again and finding something that felt honest if one was actually going through that experience.
Now, as you described, the two different modes that these characters and these actors have to go through, I'm actually assuming that that your film wasn't filmed, the production wasn't in order. So how do you get them to that point of turning that on and off throughout the entire production?
But yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. I aspire to a day where you can have a production schedule where you can have some semblance of something in linear order. But yeah, the reality is, again, I'm just grateful to be able to work with such great talent who it's a real muscle, but to be able to kind of switch so quickly. We do. There's this awful process that happens on very strict days called block shooting. I don't know if you know about this, but it's when you essentially have multiple scenes taking place at the same set or the same location. You're possibly going through a rotation of each variation of that multiple times as you move the camera. And we did have a day like this on this shoot, which involved exactly what you're asking about, which involved both modes. And it was with Belle and Nick in that case. And, it's something that is kind of amazing when it happens, but it's a lot of starts and stops, I suppose, in that process as well. But it's a funny thing, but once we landed on, the difference and the subtle things that are nuances and facial expressions, once we're able to kind of dial in on that, it was just kind of a rule that we went by and were able to kind of express. But yeah, it's again, I give all the credit to the actors that I got to work with who were able to pull that off.
I also want to commend you on the because obviously these type of characters will newly discover themselves as the plot goes on. And one of the things that you touched upon is sexual exploration in a way where it didn't seem very abusive, and then there was humor into it. Can you tell us about how you actually wanted to handle the sexual exploration and the intimate scenes for a film like this?
Yeah, from the beginning, it is a story that does involve that has a lot of sex scenes, or it seemingly did, and I was never interested in sensationalizing that or being too explicit, and I thought that we've seen that before, and I thought it was more interesting to approach it from an emotional level. So quite literally, this is something uh, our cinematographer and I had talked about quite a bit was how can we how can we frame things to keep it on the emotional experience rather than the physical experience in those setups? And a lot of times, I think I'm interested psychologically too, and there can be something more, you know, enticing about what your mind does about what happens outside of the frame lines, and sometimes is what in it. And again, we kept things usually just focused on what an emotional experience looks like. So a lot of times that was close-ups of the eyes, close-ups of the face, and trying to treat it as the emotional experience rather than the physical. And becomes a creative challenge, but I think sometimes within constraints, great things can happen. And I think we were successful in some ways of that. But also, yeah, I was just also trying to do something that we hadn't necessarily seen a scene in those ways before, and keeping it also from that world I was talking about earlier of something that was observational and surveillance like, which isn't going to be that sexy at the end of the day. And that's not what the intention of any of those sort of scenes was about.
Especially the fact that I also thought it was that very tough to put on this sort of this dystopian satire, the humor, underlying humor in some of the scenes, and you have to really pay attention to get some of that humor.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I like dry humor, I suppose, in general. And the satirical aspects were, very much from the script. And so I give Angela credit for those. And it was, I was also, I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut's work. And he has, this short story collection. And there's one short story specifically called Welcome to the Monkey House that I was reading as I was in development of film, and it plays with some of these elements and satire in a really interesting way as well. And I think having these things in the ether kind of helped fuel the decisions we made on set of how it was going to manifest.
Most excellent. Well, I've taken a lot of your time already. So, what's up next for you? Are you picking up other people's scripts, or is it about time that you worked on your script finally come to fruition? Because you said it takes a long time
Yeah.
for you to develop.
That's right. Well, I've had nothing but time lately, so it's yes, I'm very much writing a new script right now that I'm in development on, and will hopefully be my next project. But yeah, all I can say about it now is that it concerns themes that I definitely explored in my works, but is predominantly about sound and music in a new way.
Well said. And one last thought with you, Michael, because I know you went through the directing, the process of Turn Me On, and probably in that editing bay. But are you content that you don't have to hear "Are you content" anymore any longer for this film?
I think you answered that brilliantly. Yes, exactly.
Well said, Michael. Thank you very much. Everyone needs to check it out. Check out Turn Me On. We really appreciate this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.